Beatles and the Stones. What else was there, you know? Until like 67, and then you had San Francisco. But you had to travel a long way to see a good rock and roll band.
Picture this. Eric Clapton, now older, quieter, sits in the corner of a dimly lit recording studio, eyes clouded with memory and regret. Outside, the world moves on, believing the myth. But inside, something breaks. He decides to finally expose the truth, not out of malice, but because the weight of secrets has become unbearable. He speaks her name, Pattie Boyd, the woman the world saw as a golden muse, a delicate beauty who graced album covers and inspired anthems. But the image was a carefully constructed illusion. What Clapton reveals now is darker, shocking, a truth she never wanted the world to hear. For years he stayed silent, protecting her reputation, holding back out of guilt or nostalgia. But not anymore. The woman who once haunted his songs, who danced on the edge of his every heartbreak, was not simply a muse. She was a master of masks. And the heartbreak she left behind wasn't poetic. It was brutal, consuming, and inescapable. What he shares now isn't a love story. It's a reckoning. In 1964, Pattie Boyd stepped into the life of George Harrison on the set of A Hard Day's Night. She was all golden light, swinging hair, and shy smiles. To George, she was ethereal. To the Beatles, she was iconic. But inside that fairy tale, the rot was growing. Pattie wasn't content to play the part of the silent wife. She was drawn to art, chaos, and men who lived like fire. The marriage quickly strained. George, diving deeper into spirituality and solitude, became distant. Pattie, left in the shadows of Abbey Road and Maharishi retreats, grew restless. Then came Clapton. While George meditated in India, Clapton obsessed over Pattie. He wrote Layla as a desperate cry. He wrote Bell-Bottom Blues as a plea. But what looked like passion was often something darker. Clapton became addicted not just to heroin, but to the chase. He pursued her relentlessly, despite knowing it would cost him friendships, respect, even his own sanity. When Pattie finally left George, it wasn't just a romantic decision. It was a thunderclap in the world of rock. But the marriage to Clapton was no salvation. Their years together were turbulent. Clapton was broken, jealous, drunk. Pattie was drifting, unsure if she had escaped a cage or stepped into a new one. There were explosive fights, affairs, and long silences that screamed louder than guitars.
And I think that's what is fascinating about guitar playing. And the blues and rhythm and blues and rock and roll. There isn't a record made that has any soul.
Pattie's romantic history didn't end with Clapton. It detonated in all directions. Before and after, her life was tangled with musicians, artists, and chaos. Rumors buzzed like neon in a Soho alleyway, secret flings with Ron Wood of the Rolling Stones, whispered nights with famous painters, shadowy entanglements with tortured photographers who swore she tore through their lives like wildfire. She seemed drawn to men with broken pasts and brilliant masks, men who were more myth than man, more storm than shelter. And the unsettling truth? She mirrored their chaos. She didn't just observe their destruction, she danced in it, sometimes even lit the match. What began as admiration often curdled into rivalry. Lovers turned into competitors. Confidants became collateral. Emotional connections flared into jealousies, tangled power plays, and whispered betrayal. Some said she wasn't just collecting hearts, she was claiming territory. A new affair would spark just as an old one crumbled, leaving behind confusion and emotional wreckage. Those who entered her orbit often left scorched, unable to tell if they'd fallen in love or been caught in something much darker. For years, Clapton had kept this part of her life in shadows, out of respect, out of restraint. But now, as he finally lays bare the truth, he paints her not as a woman lost in love, but as a woman who used it as a weapon, not always maliciously, but always dangerously. She had the gift of muse and the bite of a tempest, and she left many of those who loved her asking the same haunted question: Was she ever really mine? Or was I just the next verse in her unfinished song? By the mid-1918s, Pattie's image as a muse had cracked. No longer simply the face behind love songs, she had become the subject of hushed conversations and quiet caution. Friends whispered of emotional manipulation, of elegant dinner parties that ended in shouting matches, of tears behind locked doors. The woman once immortalized on vinyl was in private, often volatile. An unpredictable mix of charm and chaos. There were moments when her laughter lit up a room, when her presence inspired artists to reach new depths. But there were also moments when her moods turned cold, when silence stretched like a razor, cutting deep into relationships. Clapton, in his later years, began to hint at the emotional toll her presence took, not just on him, but on everyone in her orbit. She could be magnetic and cruel in the same breath. Some said she used love like currency, offering affection only when it served her or secured her place in the spotlight. Others believed she never fully grasped the emotional debris she left behind as she moved from one man, one moment, one identity to the next. She wasn't just the muse, she was also the mirror, reflecting back the fears and insecurities of the men who adored her. And in doing so, she exposed their worst instincts. In the world of rock, where every lyric hides a memory and every memory carries a scar, Pattie Boyd became both angel and antagonist, both dream and nightmare. And for many, she remained unforgettable for reasons far more complicated than beauty alone. Pattie's troubles weren't limited to lovers. Behind closed doors, her personal life was riddled with emotional landmines. Her family life was fraught with tension, strange relationships with siblings, a lifelong estrangement from certain relatives, and bitter disagreements over money, memoirs, and control over their shared narrative. The most volatile connection was with her younger sister Jenny, whose own rise as a model sparked years of silent rivalry and cold comparison. There were whispered insults at dinner tables, passive-aggressive interviews, and photo shoots where one refused to even look the other in the eye. There were unspoken grudges that lasted decades. Friends described the air between them as glass, transparent, but dangerous. For years, the sisters drifted apart, occasionally reuniting with champagne smiles at public events before disappearing into separate cars and separate silences, even in moments meant to bring peace. Family holidays, weddings, charity events. Pattie often found herself at the center of awkward silences and icy exchanges. Her presence was magnetic and polarizing. Some welcomed her like royalty, others barely made eye contact. Money, jealousy, legacy, and differing versions of shared trauma made reconciliation not just difficult, but almost impossible. She clashed openly with other women in the rock orbit, Maureen Starkey, Ringo's sharp-witted wife, and later Olivia Harrison, George's steady and guarded second wife. There were incidents so tense they were scrubbed from official stories. Screaming matches in backstage corridors, deliberate seat placements at Beatles family events to keep them apart, and at least one event where Pattie's early departure was met with visible relief. There were also long and private battles with identity and self-worth. Despite being the muse of rock gods, Pattie often felt invisible outside the male gaze. She confessed to close friends that she feared being remembered not for who she was, but for who she inspired. That pressure turned inward, manifesting in depressive spirals, weeks of isolation, and long disappearances from the spotlight. She spent years oscillating between glamorous highs and aching lows, dressed in couture on a red carpet one day, holed up in bed with curtains drawn the next. Those who knew her best say she was forever chasing a peace that was always just out of reach. A woman adored by the world, yet constantly at war with herself. Her life, behind the magazine covers and wistful nostalgia, wasn't a fairy tale. It was a battlefield. Now, decades later, Eric Clapton finally opens up. Not in an interview, not in a memoir, but in a voice that trembles with the weight of everything unsaid. This isn't just closure, it's confrontation. he isn't just remembering, he's revealing. Because beneath the surface of every love song was a scream muffled by melody. Behind every poetic lyric was a man unraveling, and a woman who watched it happen. What Clapton exposes now isn't just heartbreak. It's the slow erosion of his identity in the presence of someone he adored, feared, and ultimately couldn't escape. He doesn't hate Pattie, but he no longer protects her either. Her beauty was undeniable, her magnetism legendary, but behind the glitter and grace, there were secrets. Emotional manipulations, patterns of cold withdrawal followed by bursts of affection, moments of control disguised as love. Her presence wasn't just intoxicating, it was addictive, and it nearly destroyed him. Clapton remembers the loneliness that crept in even as they lay side by side. The hollow mornings, the tension no one else saw. She knew how to pull him in with a glance and shut him out with a whisper. It wasn't just love, it was power. And he, lost in her myth, didn't realize until it was too late. He speaks of nights spent pacing hotel floors, of watching her vanish behind doors without explanation, of wondering who she'd become next. He began to write not to celebrate her, but to survive her. Behind every sweet lyric was a sleepless night. Behind every photograph of them smiling was a storm that had only just passed, or was about to begin. The muse who once lit his fire had, in time, left him cold and wrecked. What shocks fans now isn't just that Clapton speaks so plainly, but that the legend they once admired as a fairy tale muse is now revealed as something far more human and far more dangerous. A force who brought inspiration, yes, but also manipulation, confusion, and emotional collapse. Pattie Boyd remains a legend, not for what she created, but for the chaos she left in her wake. And Clapton, after all these years, has finally stripped away the poetry, letting the raw truth echo louder than the song ever did.